their mistakes and cast them out like demons on our stair lights at night. I gotta get inspiration.
The views expressed in the following show are of the host, the guest, and the callers. The content of the following show, its accuracy, authenticity, and the ramifications of the use or application of said content is the responsibility of those speaking and listening, not the broadcast medium.
How? We are back and we are live. Feet to the fire. I'm your host, James Yanchik, the Black Knight of Talk Radio. A little picture. I tell you, I got a little excited here. Last couple of days, I've been fighting with this turntable. I mean, I obviously had records all my life and fine equipment, or at least good consumer grade anyway, high consumer grade. Could not get this to work for the longest time. Finally got it worked last week and did some recording. Let me give you a little picture here. Oops, wrong button. Big screen. There it is. A little baby. My Techniques 1200. Got it hooked up with the tube preamp. This is the tube headphone amp. Well, if I had speakers to run it, I mean, it's about 6 watts, so it could run an efficient all-tube system. This is one of the advantages, I guess, of China or Russia or Latvia and all those other countries is because they still have tubes. And they can put them together. A lot of the stuff designed in America, like Carver, for example, my favorite guy, it's, what is it, $9,000 for just the amplifier, 2 monoblock amplifiers, and like $35,000 for his large ones. Now I'm going to start hiccuping. Great. Anyway, enough of that. That's my little personal thing. We are back on live. Inspiration is the opening song from Ann McWilliams, my favorite gal singer, songwriter. A great producer, too. Her last CD was, she produced it, recorded on 24-track analog 2-inch tape. I'm telling you, I like her. Good head, good music, and so on. Anyway, that was that. I wasn't going to have a show about inspiration, so might as well play the song Inspiration, an excuse to play Annie Mac. Also, I took the time to upload the picture that I bumped into while preparing for today that I have of my guitar, a Takamine acoustic guitar. I mean, it's kind of a cheap one, but I needed it just to record some things. And I bought it while I was down visiting in Indianapolis, and Annie Mac signed it, Ann McWilliams, so that's up there. Actually, I got a picture. Let me just go right to that now. There it is. I put it up on Facebook, and there you go. But yeah, I noticed this doesn't mean much to people, but I guess if it was, Adele, oh, wow, people would be on that. But since it's only Ann McWilliams, right, who's just fantastic. But anyway, here we are. We're back. And now I not commenting on news. I mean, it's the same stuff. If something comes up, there's some stuff I'm working on, possibly for next week. That's, I think, going to be somewhat important. But I have been working on this setup where I talk about basically my theology, my worldview, my theology. Resonating with reality is the phrase I came up with. I thought about starting a different show with that, but then I thought I just incorporated it in here and do it on occasion. I'm getting a lot of good feedback. However, it's interesting. The views are going down. The subscriptions are going up. So you tell me. I don't understand it, but as long as people want it, I'll do it. And as long as I want to do it, I'll do it. And so far, those two things are overlapping. So we will get to that in a moment. Let me look real quick. See if it, if the sky is falling down. And we need to do abort. So far, okay. So far, regular news. Now, I want to mention something, too. I had people comment on this. It's kind of embarrassing, but now, watch me, right? All of a sudden, you see me do this, right? I'm wiggling my feet. It's a nervous habit that I've had all my life. In fact, I got it from my dad. My sisters, brothers, they all do this. And I remember one time my mom coming downstairs. We're all sitting on a couch watching TV, and we're all wiggling our feet, and my mom said, where are you guys going? So in case you see me doing this, I don't know what to say. It's unconscious. I can't stop it. So there you go. Another disclaimer to go along with my dyslexia, and I don't know what else. What other flattering thing I can put out there. Real good at self-marketing. Anyway, let me get to the meat and potatoes. Inspiration. Now, I actually put it in order this time because I was started to do it out of order, and I rearranged things to try and make things more linear. Now I ran, I have these links. I'm using the Bible, not that I'm using the Bible like, I'm beating it over the head with the Bible. No, I'm using the wisdom, ancient wisdom that's in there as the definitions to understand what we're talking about. Because nowadays, words don't mean nothing anymore. I mean, to me, they do, and to many, they do. But a lot of people, they don't mean anything anymore. And people say things like, for example, they say, the apocalypse is coming, like it's the end of the world. Apocalypse is the Greek word that's translated in Revelations in English, and it means the unveiling, revealing or unveiling. It doesn't mean the end of the world. It doesn't mean destruction. It means, this is apocalyptic proportions. It's completely misused. So there's nothing wrong with a country or a nationality or whatever changing. Words change throughout time. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you're wanting to talk in any kind of reference, you need to have a basis set up. So when you have a discussion with someone, the first thing you should do is understand and agree on terms. Otherwise, it doesn't matter because it's going to be, well, you said that. Well, that's not what I meant. I meant this. Well, no, that's what I heard. And, so this is where I come up with the definitions and what I have chose being centering my theology on Jesus' teachings, which does not necessarily coincide with any churches. In fact, most churches would call me a heretic, and I've already lost several people I've known for years when I revealed that gasp, I am not a believer in the pre-tribulation rapture. I don't think it. I think it's a constructed theology, and it's not organically coming out of. Anyway, so enough of that talk. So I want to mention inspiration. Now, the word inspiration, or to inspire, what we're talking in a spiritual sense, goes back to the Greek, which would be pneuma, which is an example of the correct use of the Greek word pneuma in a modern text would be pneumatic tires. Pneuma would be the breathe in, the inspiration, the air filled in the lungs. When you breathe in to talk and words come out, what inspires you? I mean, this is the idea behind it. So let's go to, and actually I would like comments. If people think this is dry and boring, let me know, because, I'm just sharing. But, and I took John. Actually, what verse did I take? Matthew 5. All right, let's go to Matthew 5. There. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, some of the, and in fact, I could pick any of these verses here, all quote work. Some people know, who study this, know that the early manuscripts of Matthew say, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. and that somewhere along the line, probably somebody was putting a parenthetical expression to take away the idea that you're meaning poor in money-wise. It means poor in spirit, which should be downtrodden, and so forth. That would be the context that we're looking at here. But I'm just looking at the word for spirit, and it's all over the place. It's in the New Testament 377 times, and you also have it in an Old Testament. However, the Old Testament, well, I'll get to that. I shouldn't say however. Greek word is pneuma, and there's different tenses. I am not a Greek scholar by any chance. And what I'm saying is that they're just like you say, of course, came, went. Of course, we have different words for the tenses a lot of times, which makes things difficult. But in the Greek, they have different endings to refer to whether it's singular, plural, past, present, perfect tense, and then again, I want to also remind you that at one point nobody knew what Greek meant, the words, and they had to refigure it out. So the margin of error, which is there, is irrelevant because the vast majority of it is figured out, and so don't worry about it. People who claim the Bible is this and the other thing, it's pretty reliable for information. It's the interpretation is where all the trouble goes wrong. Let me. So anyway, so we have the pneumati in this particular sense, which is this in breath, wind, and spirit. Let me get to the word pneuma, and I'm using the Strong's numbers because they're simple and easy. They're common. It's online. People can follow what I'm doing. They can do it on their own. You get into the super high-tech stuff. They'll say that there's some errors in Strong's concordance, and again, these errors are so technical that if you're going to be a technical Bible critic, of course you got to know all this stuff, and but me and you, I learned enough of it to know, like, okay, it's not that big of a deal, and I'll leave it at that. I'm not gonna. Anyway, the word pneuma, the idea is wind, breath, spirit. This is how people define. Of course, the word spirit we don't want to use because that's how we're coming from it. The idea of the tense and all that other stuff, that's, again, it doesn't matter. It's because of who's talking about. If it's feminine, masculine, and all that stuff, we'll just let that go. Looking at the Matthew 4:1, which is another verse of it, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, Diablo. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that if you look at the word spirit, it's still pneuma, but it's pneumatos, which is going to be genitive, neuter, singular. In other words, what this is, it's led by the Spirit. It could mean the Holy Spirit, which a lot of people look at it. It could mean that his inspiration led him there, whether it be God personally or the Holy Spirit doing it, or the inspiration, he was inspired to go to it. But the way it's said here, it gives the impression kind of a a noun. Okay, it says a noun. So it's like a spirit. It would be more like a noun. So, but the point is, all the word spirit comes from pneuma, which is this wind, the breath, and so forth. So what inspires you? What is what comes inside of you to inspire you? This is important because we'll get to that, but this is why I'm setting this up. Obviously, I'm not just doing it to waste your time. And this is where I was talking about the Holy Spirit, when you have the different gender of it, when you add the pneumatos. I mean, my Greek is worse than my English. That's a kind of a joke, but this is where it's why you can see where it's translated in all the various versions of it, the Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost in the case of King James and so forth. So you have the idea where you have the Spirit being an actual noun or being, and then you can have the Spirit being of the inspiration. It's just giving you a kind of a well-rounded aspect of it. So when someone says, I'm inspired, the question would be, by what? Because the inspiration is breathed into you. So if you saw a movie that was, it opened up, I'm inspired to go start woodworking or whatever, what inspired you? Well, I saw this movie, or I went to this museum, or inspiration. There's also, I want to look at the, in Timothy, there is, all Scripture is God-breathed. That is important. See, all Scripture is inspired by God, okay? The word there is pneuma. I'm going to mess this up now. Theopneumatos. Theopneumatos. And that is the idea of God-breathed. So now there's one word, it appears, let me see if it's right. I got a different thing here. It appears once in the New Testament, theopneumatos. In the 2 Timothy, it's created one time, theopneumatos. Because instead of saying inspiration, they're saying God-breathed inspiration. So again, I want to mention that idea of inspiration being breathing. I probably boring people to tears, but I'll get to the inspiration in a minute here. In the Hebrew, you have the idea of an equivalent in Hebrew is talking about imagination. People are prophesying out of their own imagination. As we look into the Hebrew term, as we get into here, those who prophesy from their own inspiration, in the Hebrew, the idea is more from inside your own heart. In other words, your inspiration is from yourself, your fears, your biases, your prejudices, your desires. This is where the inspiration comes from. Now it talks about, I'm going to get into my talk here in a second. That's just great. Testing the spirits. 1 John 4, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether or not they are from God, because many false prophets have gone into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God is that every spirit that confesses Jesus has come in the flesh. Very interesting, because this is, back then they were dealing with Gnosticism, the proto-Gnosticism, I should say, which said that Jesus came as spirit, not by body, and that the flesh doesn't matter. This is where the Gnostics came from out of it, whereas the Orthodox, were very important about what the body does. But so that he's making a deal here, and it says that every spirit who does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of Antichrist, which you have heard coming, and you know is already in the world. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this part up, and we can get into this aspect. And what did I do with it? Oh, I hit the wrong button. There we go. Ear from God, Theo. Any false prophet. When I got to test the spirits. There's the pneuma again. Test the inspiration. Every time you see the word spirit in the Bible, say the word inspiration. Test the inspiration to see if it's whether it's from God. See, that's very interesting, very important. And then as we go into later on in the verse, I think it's here, that does not confess Jesus Christ is in the flesh, has come not from God, but this is the spirit is from Antichrist. Interesting, the word Antichrist is antichristo. So it is, I guess they could have put the word, just the letter A, because acristo would mean the same thing, would be like atheist, that would be the English way, but antichristo, it's referring to, and Christo is Messiah, so it's anti, but it's what I would translate this, rather than saying Antichrist in a personal sense, and I think Jesus, as he's teaching here, or well, it's John, as he's teaching here, is saying this is this spirit is against Christ, against God, which you've heard is coming, meaning the Antichrist is coming. But I tell you, it was already in the world. So what I think John is saying here at this point is, you're looking forward for this Antichrist. The spirit, the Antichrist spirit, is here and already has been here. Here we are in the first century. It was already here. So that's a little of a side. And now I thought about this in the Lord's Prayer. Well, does Jesus ask us to pray for inspiration from God? And I kind of thought so. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So to lead and deliver is the key words in there. And as I look it up, it wasn't the case, but in a way, oops, I got the wrong button again. And lead us not into temptation. And like, there's no inspiration in there. But I looked up lead and deliver. You have the aspects of, if someone inspires you to do something, they're going to breathe into you some part that's going to be interesting or moving or emotionally arousing, that you will make a choice on your own to go do something or variant of it. If you are being led or delivered, as here is we're talking about in the Greek, you have this aspect of actually coming and taking your hand and pulling you along or pushing you along. There's a passive inspiration which may or may not get you to do something, and it's your choice to do it. And then there is the lead or deliver here, which is in Greek word that has the idea of actually going and taking your hand or pushing you, physically arresting you, so to speak, would be delivering them up to be crucified. So you have that. So it's very interesting. I found in this, I hope it is interesting to somebody, is that you have the inspiration, which is, it's not tangible. It's real. It's not tangible. It's not physical in the sense that it may use a physical medium like a movie or words or a poem or song or whatever. It may use words, and that inspiration comes across from a physical spore, like a speaker would be the physical driver. The music that's in your head is the inspiration. There may be a physical driver of it, but it comes into you, and you make the choice. And somebody who's going to be a negative inspiration is going to use the motivation. How do I do this now? Use the motivation, use some kind of motivating aspects of it. Well, it's a life coach, some kind of motivator. Those would be, I guess, positive ones. Ones who want to get money and get you to buy a car or something would be negative. But they will use some ideas, whereas the taking and delivering is the physical act of it. And notice that when Jesus taught to pray, he is telling you, basically saying, God, I want your active physical presence in my life, and I don't want you to lead me in temptation, but I want you to deliver me from evil. Pick me up and deliver me from evil. Very interesting. He's not asking for inspiration because we get inspiration. We seek it. It's all around us. It's brainwashing. It's what have you. But you have this aspect of you're going to God, I want you to come here and take my hand and do this. Very interesting. I thought that, and I never thought about that before until I read this, and I thought that was very interesting. I hope it's interesting to you. And so the reason why I bring this up is in last week, what did I have here? Oh, this is the idea of this physically moving the word to carry some burden, to move by bearing, to bear up, uphold, to bring forward. You have this physical aspect of it, which I already said this already, but this is the breakdown of the Greek word. So what I'm saying in this aspect of it, and we got that out of the way, and I wanted to say it though because it means something. I'm not just sitting here talking out of my mouth, My inspiration is twofold. It's for reading authoritative works to understand and led by the inspiration of God. I pray for God to be inspired in my learning. God has this plan on earth where it's like, it's a free will. What does free will really mean? Is that you're free to screw it up. You're free to do whatever you want. You're free to be misled. You can be misled unbeknownst to yourself. That freedom is on this planet. This is the point. One of the aspects of being alive in this planet, and the point is to have this idea. And so you want to make sure your inspiration comes from a good source. And you want to avoid people who are going to physically not inspire you, but override you. And this is what's going on. Look at what's going on in our country right now with all this stuff. We're getting bad inspiration and good inspiration, and you're getting people who are trying to then step to the next level of forcing. So, this stuff applies to it. Now, what this graphic is over here, I just said, what's your inspiration? Where is it? Who is it? The guy on the left was it the left when you're looking at? Yeah. Is actually Marduk. So that would be kind of a negative inspiration. On the other side, you have Michael the Archangel, who is stepping on the devil. It's a rendering of a verse where Michael's inspiration has come from God. May the Lord rebuke you. Again, he's not doing it in and this is why I'm explaining a little graphic. So what is your inspiration? We have to realize you're always inspired all the time. We're inspired by habits. They've been inspired and imprinted in our mind. And I want to bring up, let me finish one thing first and I'll get to this. The reason why I bring this up this week was last week I talked about meditation. And getting your answer in your meditation is being inspired, which of course segues to this. What I didn't mention last week, and I was going to, is that at least I don't think I mentioned it. I didn't watch the show. Maybe I did, but one of the popular meditation techniques is transcendental meditation. Now, the problem with that is you're emptying your mind. Okay, that's fine. You want to get out of the way and invite the divine inspiration or your higher information from your higher self, your soul self, or whatever. But transcendental meditation the concept is to empty your mind. Leave the front door open and nothing there. Well, of course, stuff could walk in. You can get inspired by negative entities if you don't direct your request. I think about it. I did mention a little bit of this, but I want to mention about the idea of so that when you're inspired, like if you're watching a movie that's inspiring someone to violence, there's the inspiration. And all the movies and video games are all talking about killing each other. How can somebody justify playing a video game whose core fun, if you will, is brutally murdering people? Now, you could cover it in and say, well, they're the bad guys and I'm protecting the world. Okay, but brutally murdering people would graphic the thing that drives. There wouldn't be any more new computers, basically, and I'm serious, if it wasn't for the advancement of video games, demands on the processors and the cards. You can buy video cards that are more expensive than the rest of the computer, and then people buy 2, 3, 4 of them and stick them in there. On a computer I built to run the video system here, I put a rather expensive card in. It wasn't the best at the time, but it was pretty good. And people were buying those at 3. My video board can take 3 of them, and you SLI them together so that they all work together, so they can make a more realistic game. I mean, that's what's driving computers now is video games. So you got to ask yourself, how can I watch this movie which is violently blowing people up? How can I watch that? How can I watch these movies which has salacious sexual scenes in it? What's the inspiration in there? What am I thinking about? Sex is a very personal, intimate thing between two people. How am I sitting there watching that? Now, I'm not trying to sound like a prude here. I mean, I've watched movies that were violent and sexual in the past, and at some point it came around and going like, I shouldn't be seeing this because it's a private. You're voyeuristically looking into. In the case of making love, is not bad amongst the two people in love, but that third person watching it is seeing something special. So that's an inspiration. What are you going to do with an inspiration? You watch this movie, and of course these people are acting. So now if you get into the higher logical aspect of it, they're not even real. They're pretending. You got cameras around them and cameramen, and let's take this spot. Let's put this fake perspiration on them, and okay, start from this scene here, and it's all fake. First off. Same thing with the bombing and blowing up. They're not actually blowing up people, but they're going to great pains to show how realistically their guts can blow up and spread on everybody. That's your inspiration. You got the Antifa movements going on are inspiring violence. Going back to the brown shirts. Go in your face. Go into your opponent's face. Go, what is it, the latest one? Go where the Republicans sleep. What? What is that? And so when you go to a preacher, I mean, I've been to hardcore fundamentalist church where they're damning everybody. And they're basically saying that, if you don't do this, that, and the other thing, you're going to hell and you're going to heaven. I mean, they're going to hell, you're going to heaven. And you're actually enjoying it. You're enjoying your specialty that I'm not going to hell. They are. In fact, you need someone to go to hell to make your heaven worth it. And I've had this talk when I was a fundamental Bible teacher. I said, why do you need someone to go to hell? And, and I had the pastor's wife in my class who said, well, it's righteousness. I mean, what's the point then? Anybody can do anything. And I said, well, the whole point of what's right and wrong is based on built-in mechanisms. I mean, for example, if you rob a house, you can get killed, you can go to prison. That person now is harmed from you, and there's some kind of a karmic debt on your soul in this aspect. As you sow, you reap. Those are good enough reasons not to do it without having it be hellbound. And so on. I'm kind of mixing up some of the other stuff, but this is the way the inspiration is very important. So if you're watching TV, you're being inspired, whether you know it or not. In fact, that's the whole idea of propaganda, is to inspire people to do things. So when you listen to the propaganda of particular networks, I have a friend of mine who was devout liberal, hates Trump, and he'd want to see Trump out and all that stuff. And I would say that no, Trump is not a racist. He didn't do this. Oh, well, you're listening to Fox News. And the reality is, I don't listen to Fox News because Fox News has their own inspiration. And right now they're playing. But if it came up where they'd be advantage to throw Trump under the bus, which is what they did in the beginning, they would do it. There isn't a place to go that's free that you can trust and just listen to. Nowhere. Not here, not anywhere. You can't go anywhere. You can't watch anything. You can't read any book, see any movie, listen to anybody, preacher or otherwise, and just say, okay, I'm going to believe him because he's a nice guy. He's got good words. He's a successful businessman. Or, I don't know, whatever. He writes good tunes. Whatever it is. You can't believe them. You can't accept them. That inspiration has to be, test the spirits. Test the inspiration to see if it was from God. And in one verse, it gave an example about Jesus coming in the flesh, but that was dealing with Gnosticism at that time. In the proto-Gnosticism and I can't think of the word now, conventional Orthodox. The proto-Orthodox and the proto-Gnosticism, which are lost in time. All we see is the results of the two splits. There was a thing going on between the theology on this. And so in that verse, test the spirits as to whether Jesus Christ came in the flesh. And of God, and you could tell of God would be whether the inspiration in him is of God. And so that was it. But the idea is still there. Test the spirits. Test the inspiration to see whether it's from God. Anything. And how do you test them? Well, a lot of people just use their emotions. A lot of people who are in the more if you got people who are legalistically bound, which would be more like the Baptist types, the fundamentalist Baptist types, they're gonna take their taught theology, their taught doctrine, and they're going to measure it against the words of the Bible that they have analyzed to get their doctrine, and they're going to measure it against what's said, and they're going to judge whether or not it's good to listen to. That's got problems. Is your understanding correct? well, it was taught by this guy, it was taught by that guy. It goes back to, you can't do that. You can't rely on what they said. You have to know it. It's like people listening to doctors. Well, the doctor knows. Well, now they're full of drugs. My sister's has a lot of references. She's in a benzo treatment recovery board, and they all listened to their doctor and took their pills, and now they're all having echinacea and other nerve damages, and they're trying to get over it and get out of it, and it's all because they listened to authority. And so when you have this aspect of listening to authority, authority is not, in and of itself, okay to be inspired by. It has to make sense. There has to be a rubber hits the road. And this is where I talk about the lack of contradiction, and the contradiction has to do with various things that you're using, including reality. If someone gave you all kinds of magical incantations that you could fly when you jump off a cliff, no, really, it'll work. It goes back to the ancient, look at the ancient scriptures we found, or the ancient whatever, and blah, blah, blah. The idea is that guy flying around? Which they're not. And so when you jump off the cliff and you didn't have enough faith. You see how that works? I mean, you can't. We're in a position now that everything is all has its own ulterior motives, its own inspiration. And I think the reason why I wanted to get into this was the amount of inspiration out there is unprecedented in history. You have the entire internet. You have the entire 500 channels of TV. You have the movies. You have the books. You have the various speakers. Because of the access of the internet, you have all these people speaking and talking. Let me see if I can. Yeah. You see, now maybe I can get into this now. One of the things I wanted to do a show on, and maybe I can segue into this now, is the whole idea of the God-inspired Bible. Somebody wrote in there that God wrote the Bible. No, God didn't write the Bible. This is the declaration of man. If you look at the simple way I started to learn this is when I was reading through the Bible, which I've listened to on tape more than anything else I've listened to it over and over and over and over. Nowadays, I concentrate on New Testament, Jesus' words in particular, but when you read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that's the Pentateuch, right? Moses wrote those books. When you go into Joshua, which is the 6th book, it's the exact same style, person, format. It's the exact same thing. You have Moses writing a book saying, and then Moses said to them, blah, 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 blah. Who writes books like that? I mean, the logical explanation of this is that there were scriptures around. I mean, most likely. I'm just going to assume for the sake of discussion there was, that were first person, Moses' teachings, for example, and then somebody decided to make a narrative, which is easier for teaching. It also, of course, allows corruption, but I'll let that go for now. So that when the Bible was put together in the first 6 books, it's a narrative. When you look at the Gospels in the New Testament, it's a narrative. And that narrator, who is given Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, maybe they are, I'm not even commenting on that, they're using actual text that they have and plugging them into a narrative. Now, the assumption is that their narrative is true. And, people are going to have to make their own decisions for that. The narrative part, I don't look at the narrative personally. I look at the data, the information, the quotes, the teachings contained therein. Because to me, it doesn't matter if Moses literally wrote every word, including, and then Joshua just wrote in the same style. I don't care. What I care about is what's there. And how does it match up to Jesus' teachings? If you want to call it arbitrarily, I've made a decision in my life that Jesus is the corrector of the correction, the lens, the glasses that came to earth to set things right, to explain what the reality of what God wants us to do on earth. And he has went back, you've heard it written this. Well, I say unto you that. He's correcting the old scripture. It's actually the teaching of it. He talks about the scripture is not the problem. It's the teaching of it, and it's the principles that are applied from it and how people are hypocrites. That's the problem. And so when people think that their Bible was like Moses wrote it, handed it to Joshua, they have the Judges and the Chronicles and Kings, and then you have the various prophets, and he's kind of just added their piece in and tagged it along, which is what I used to think. It's not the case. It doesn't mean that the Bible isn't fantastic. It is. It is what I base my faith on and my understanding of reality, and it works. It's understandable, especially the Jesus part of it. But when someone says that God wrote the whole Bible, that's not correct. It's used as proofs. Now, for example, I remember now. I come from a fundamental Baptist, teaching it. I understand it. It says in the Bible that Paul said that Peter is, and I just read about how the Bible is inspired by God and all that. Well, it is true. It's inspired by God. So were the other prophets, apostles. Inspired, that's the important part. Inspired means I'm giving you inspiration, and what you do with it is your choice. So God inspired the Bible in the life chain of how the Bible was written. God's inspiration is all through it. What they at that time and what people at this time do with it is their choice. So when you say God inspired it and you're reading the words in English, excuse me, when you're looking at the Son of Man, prophecy against the prophets of Israel, when you read the Son of Man, what does that mean, Son of Man? No one knows what it means. I'll bet they got a bunch of ideas, and I think we're pretty close and all, but no one knows what that phrase means. Son of Man? You mean he was born from a man? That's impossible. So if you look at it literally, it doesn't work. And in a figurative sense, it could mean a lot of things. So what I take Son of Man to mean is that, Jesus is emphasizing his humanity and that he's talking to humans how they can have eternal life. He's talking of a human to a human, and how to do it. He's from God. He is God-inspired. He has, he is blessed by God through the various acts. He's inspired by God. His wisdom is correct. He's listening to the good. He's got good inspiration, and he's acting on it. It's good stuff. And he says, then he keeps saying, Son of Man. He keeps keeps wanting to do this stuff. And it's a phrase that goes back to the Old Testament, phraseology of it. So you're going to look up the Hebrew Son of Man phrase and the Aramaic aspects of it. Then you have the when they speak it originally in Aramaic, they speak it in Greek or Hebrew, Greek, or in the Old Testament, New Testament. Did they speak it in fact, in the Old Testament, did they speak it in Hebrew? As far as I understand, and historically, Hebrew got lost along the way, except for the Pharisee or the scribes, the Pharisees, the rabbis. But the people spoke Aramaic, and so. Basically, it's akin to, if you go to the Catholic Church, they have Latin is their thing, and people speak English. It's kind of like an analogous to it. And so there was a rebirth in going back to Hebrew, and and that's fine. That's good. And the problem is they don't know how to say certain words because at one point, the oldest Hebrew text doesn't have any vowel pointers. So just think if you took an English Bible and took all the vowels out of it, you got to figure out what it is. And unfortunately, some of the words, like if you have S blank M blank, some, same, and then you got to look in the context. I mean, it takes work, and there's people dedicated their lives for it and did a good job. But you understand is that the inspiration of the people who are interpreting it is the key of what they're interpreting. You have to do that. No, I don't know Greek and Hebrew. I look up benign sources of Greek and Hebrew that don't have an axe to grind. Preachers have an axe to grind. Denominations have an axe to grind. But, scholars, in a very limited sense of understanding the backgrounds don't. No, I don't know. He's Orlando is here in the chat room saying that God wrote the first books of the 5 books of Moses. I've never even heard that. What I've heard God writing would be the 10 Commandments, which he broke the first set of 10 Commandments, and a guy went back up there and said, God, I kind of lost my temper. Could you write another one? And so that's the only thing that the Bible says that God himself wrote. Now, God also told the prophets, and the prophets would turn around and say, thus saith the Lord, as opposed to, I got an idea, or, this is what the church says. So the prophets are supposed to be, when I got a word from God, I'm going to say this is from God, and it better be from God. And if things don't happen like you said, then you don't fear them. You don't respect them. Which applies today. A lot of people get words from God, and I'm not here to say no one does. But in my personal experience, I found that the people who get words from God are very ambiguous, not too unlike psychics who are very ambiguous and allow you to fill in the blanks. I found that a lot of people who get words of prophets from God are rather ambiguous, and they kind of morph into the reality as things happen, and some that are too far out are just forgotten. That's why I don't even seek prophecy. Of course, the word prophecy I've determined to mean truth or reality. But I don't seek someone to give me a prophecy, because you're dealing with what's their inspiration. Did they understand it right? Maybe it's a good source. Did they understand it right? What biases did they have or in the middle of it? And then you can get into the MK Ultra programming, where you get the hardcore, physical hardcore programming. That's inspiration, all right. It's pile driving inspiration to train you to do what you want. And then you have the propaganda type of inspiration, where they're, I call it a soft programming. Hard programming would be an MK Ultra, torture, whatever. Soft programming would be propaganda, which is, I'm going to guess that propaganda has always been around, but right now in America we have so much of it because of literally have a war going on, a coup, a battle, a war going on. So you end up having, you have this happen because you have these aspects. Then you have people who are developing their own internal guide. Now, when you get into charismatic denominations, a lot of them are emotional as opposed to spiritual. Now, I'm not making fun of all denominations, all people on the earth. All of them have godly people in there. Even atheists. I can argue. I can explain that at some other time. So my point is, I'm not picking on anybody. I'm picking on everybody. All denominations are wrong. All religions are wrong. All people are wrong, and all of them are right. And so what we need to do is develop our prayer and meditation, get inspiration, guard against false inspiration, to help us understand and to make active choices in space and time. You have the inspiration, and then you have the action. And you can be inspired all you want until you take action. That's the reality of our world. You have to do it. And that's why things like just do it is bad. Because they're saying, don't think about what to do, just do it. No, you need to have deliberation. You have to be educated. You have to then try and go forward. You may fail. You'll learn from it. Failing is not bad. Erring is not bad. And hopefully you don't err by blowing up a city or something like that. But, it's inspiration. Your inspiration you're going to get along the way. And what I think Jesus was trying to teach people was a methodology and how you could clean up, enhance, lubricate, oil, refurbish our connection to God, which when we say that we're lost, but we still have the connection there. That's why when we reach out for God for help, he's there. Now, the help is based on a situation where what do you need to do or serve? Highest, best good. Remember, highest, best good for all involved. Where you're at right there. Not looking over there, not thinking about what happened 1,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. Right here, right now, what's the highest, best good for all involved, including yourself? Sometimes you take it on the chin for the group. Sometimes the group takes it on the chin for you. What's the highest, best good for your group, your family, whether you're, you have a group at family. Then you have, like your acquaintances, neighbors, or what have you. You got your work, people at work. There's a highest, best good for that group. You don't live alone. You are your brother's keeper in as much as you're responsible for doing the highest, best good for all those involved. Now, you're not your brother's keeper if your brother does not do that. You can try and do what you got to do. But these are the kind of things that when you put it together, it's very understandable. Isn't it? I didn't want to say, doesn't it make sense? It's logical, reasonable. But you get thrown in church, you get thrown a lot of curveballs, especially, up until recently, the Catholic Church was doing it in Latin, as if anybody knows Latin. Now, you could learn Latin so you understand it, but the idea is, and forget now, it goes from Hebrew to Latin or Hebrew to Greek to Latin, depending upon how it's. The Septuagint is actually a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And then you have Latin. Now, the Latin goes back to the Greek. I believe you have Greek to Latin. Hebrew to Latin. And you have Greek to Latin. And then Latin and Greek was forgotten. No one knew how to read ancient Greek. All you had was Latin. So now you go from the Latin to the English. And then now you got people who started to learn the Greek, and then they make Greek to English. And this is where you have some differences between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. It has to do with having Greek in there. There's all reasons for all these things. Very simple. Not complex, very understandable. Now, if your goal is to find out, I want to know, like, what Jesus says and what he meant. That's what I know. I don't care what denomination it is. I don't care whatever. You can find out pretty good. You can find out, but this way, you can find out good enough to benefit you in your spiritual growth in your soul. No problems. Whether the details, certain details here and there, it doesn't matter. That's the beauty about this is whatever I may say about the Bible and its misconceptions, the good news, if I can paraphrase from Jesus, is that there is enough there to do the job. It's good. It's all good. And if people's faith is based on every word of the Bible being perfect and true, it's just, it's not based in reality. And you're going to either block yourself off into an echo chamber, or you're going to go out and be discouraged and go. And a good example is a guy who's a scholar. I recommend reading his work. And I can't think of his name now, of course. It's on my Facebook page if you look in the books. Bart Ehrman. He was a fundamentalist Christian who went to a liberal Bible university, and they looked at the rationalities of a lot of the stuff in the, like I'm talking about. He ended up losing his faith in it, and now he's an agnostic. Well, it's because of the rigidness of thinking that you are taught the Bible perfectly and it's all perfect and good. I mean, the Muslims say the same thing about the Quran. The Quran is the same. It's never been altered. It's perfectly and yet there's different manuscripts with differences. Of course it's going to happen, if nothing else by accident, let alone nefarious. And now you're a scribe. You got two manuscripts and you're copying, and you got two of them, and there's like, for example, it said, blessed are the poor in spirit, and another one says, blessed are the poor. You're like, what do I do? What do I do? I want to change the Bible? Oh, my God, So what they'll do is include them to be safe. Now, there's no real harm in it. And it's true. There is no harm in it. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. I mean, I'm giving you examples where, and when you get into some of the doctrinal differences, it's going to go like, well, the Holy Communion. Does the bread actually turn into Jesus' body? The Catholics say it turns into the body when the priest blesses it, and that's why you're not supposed to chew it. Of course, they don't give you a piece of bread. They give you a little wafer. The Lutherans say that it turns into its body and blood after you eat it. The Baptists will say that it's a remembrance. of his. It doesn't actually turn in our body either before or after you eat it. And you have these various doctrines, and they'll argue. And if you look at the actual literal Bible, it says, "Take, eat, this is my body." Now, does he mean, take, eat, this represents my body? And using English, people say, you can use the word represents, but you could also say, for example, this is my, this is this. And you don't have to say represents. And so you can take it too literal, and it's funny how the Baptists are usually take things very literal, and in this case, you're taking it figuratively. And yet the Catholics could in a liberal sense, would take things more figurative, are now taking it literal. So it's just a wild thing. So what happens when you look into that and you're like, oh no, what if it is? What if my way was wrong? What? It doesn't. The only way it's wrong is if you're looking at, I'm taking this bread, and because I'm doing this ritual for the ritual's sake, it means something. Any ritual is meant to point back to a real avenue or aspect of it. And this is a problem with most organized religion. All the rituals actually do something. They forgive sins or what have you. And it's so funny because, and believe me, I've studied this for years. This started back in the 90s, which is, the 90s was like only a few years ago, but actually it's not. So this all started with me, and I kept reading this stuff, and I was worried about, what if I get it wrong? And I followed this teacher and that teacher and this writer and this preacher and this teacher, and I'm finding problems with it. And finally, when my own personal life problems fell apart, and I broke down in a sense of like overwhelmed and all this, and my life got put back together again, I started fresh. And I said, I want to know truth. I don't want to know Baptist theology, Catholic theology. I want to know truth. And I've put together for my own self a theology that works. Lack of contradiction. It explains everything I've come up with. There's an explanation for it, and it's relaxed. It's not forced. There's I don't knows included in it, and that's okay. And so from that aspect about it, I'm very comfortable with it. And this is why I've been teaching this stuff. Well, sharing. Please forgive me on that. Why I've been sharing this information, and people can do whatever they want with it because it may help somebody. And I'm not even interested in the numbers. Because when I do this stuff, I only am inspired to keep doing it, and I learn stuff, and I actually can feel a spiritual difference in myself when I do these studies. In fact, each week I do more and more prep on it. I'm doing a lot of this from memory because I did all this already. But then I'm looking up and finding, like today I found another thing that I didn't think about between inspiration and action. And lead us to temptation, deliver us from evil. That's physically doing it versus inspiring. So Jesus didn't say, pray to God for inspiration. He says, pray to God for action. I want what's on heaven that's on earth. Don't lead me into trouble. Lead me out of trouble. Actively go in there and lead me out of trouble, which I never thought of before. Not that it's earth-shattering, but it's kind of like, oh, hey, yeah, that makes sense. Let me look in here. No, but I've already seen people arguing about translations and stuff on the Quran. They're saying it's one, there's only one. I have not. I've seen there's different ways of looking at it. So I mean, I'm not here to argue this. And if by chance there was one Quran that's been copied accurately, there's problems with it. Like all holy books, there isn't a definitive. God did not come down and go, here is the manual that you will follow by the letter and do. And a case example would be the theology that's carried in the Quran. Just like in the Old Testament, you could, have multiple wives. You can have slaves in the sense that people will sell their future to you, economically. We've got out of that. Does that mean it's okay to do it because we did it back then? The way the women got married, men and women got married was and Jacob went into her and took her as wife. They didn't say they went down, they had engagement, they went down and had a big ceremony. Well, is that okay to do now? Well, all of that stuff is okay because it's the principle of it. I got to go up and get it. I have the Quran over here, and I've went through it. I've talked to it with, there's a Pakistani guy that was big on the Quran. We've talked many times on things, and I've heard absolutely different interpretations. So I'm not going to argue about it because the Quran I'm not using at all for any inspiration whatsoever. I'm not even using the Old Testament anymore because of the problem. I mean, read the Holy Virus and say, you look at Jesus, for example. What did Jesus say about going out and killing people, about going out to war, about shedding blood? None of it. And yet, when we need to kick ass, we go to the Old Testament, go to the Quran. A lot of ass kicking in there. Jesus didn't talk about that. I mean, I can go on and on. This is why I've chosen to follow Jesus' teachings over everything. And I've went and looked at the Hebrew, Greek and Hebrew. Greek is New Testament. Probably Jesus taught in Aramaic, at least that, probably Greek and Aramaic. Paul at one point did speak in Aramaic and Greek. And I think in the Greek enough is there to do it. That's why. And whether or not I know from dealing with the Bible that there are different manuscripts because we're talking about, let's put it this way. The oldest Old Testament, well, which would be the Hebrew Scriptures, the oldest existing one is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's 2,000 years old. And yet it talks about a 5,000 or 6,000 year history. So all you can go back is 2,000 years. The oldest manuscripts in the New Testament are going into the first century. Right, and it's Paul stuff. The Quran was hundreds of years after that, so they have a less of a lineage of copying it. But all of it's irrelevant because if you're going to show me a scripture that says go out and kill somebody, you lost me. That's why the Hebrew Testament lost me. The Quran lost me. All that stuff loses me. Because in my way is that Jesus' teachings are irrefutable. Now, I would say that if you want to have someone who is not an apologist, but someone who knows the Quran and wants to talk and have Jesus' teaching versus the Quran's teaching, and I want that person to come up with teachings in the Quran that are different and against and what Jesus is teaching, you will find them, which is why I've never went into it deeply. Because it's a cousin to the Old Testament. Jesus came in and used terms like Father. There has been terms, Abba has been used in the Old Testament, but Jesus never called him Lord. What I mean by Lord is Jehovah or Yahweh, however you want to say it. That word was never used by Jesus. It wasn't in the Greek. It was Theos was the Greek, referring to God, or Father, which would be translated Abba. In fact, at one time they transliterated. They just said Abba, Abba. That's different than the Old Testament. The idea is that you're looking at God as your Father, not the Lord of hosts who commands the armies that slaughter the heathen. This is stuff I want nothing to do with. And it's my choice. If someone else wants to, that's their choice. But this is why you'll see me teaching. There I go with teaching, sharing. When I mean teaching, I'm talking about the teaching of Jesus. This is why you'll see me doing this, is because Jesus answers the contradictions of killing, blood, and whatnot. And this is why when Paul talks about the blood sacrifice, you got to read the book, Holy Virus. I've had Lionel on. You can actually go listen to many shows we did. There was a video I did with it on there. You go to holyvirus.com. You can see and read a bunch of stuff. The books, you could even got, if the Free to the Fire, you got a discount. And in fact, he's running out of copies. But there is a PDF of it. And it explains that a lot of the blood and guts in the Old Testament is actually from the Babylonians, which actually comes back gave to the Babylonians from the Sumerians. This is the history of it, which finds its way into the Quran. You have all the blood and guts goes through that whole area. And that you have the teaching of Jesus does not talk about that. And that's just the way it is. Yeah, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to go pick up the Koran and go through it now and put all the stuff in there, all the blood and guts in there? I mean, it's just not going to do it because it won't be fruitful because you're going to believe what you're going to believe, and that's fine. That's fine. All I'm offering here is I'm talking about inspiration and all that. We got off on a sidetrack, but that's all I'm talking about here. I'm going to be disproving or altering interpretations based on the Greek and Hebrew understanding of the words. This is what they meant, best I can come up with. And after that, you're on your own. Well, you're on your own anyway, but you know what I'm saying? That's what it is. I'm not going to get into an argument on it because it's fruitless. There's no fruit can come out of it because if I start bringing out, because for example, give you an example, there are people who are quoting from the Quran talking about marrying your brother or your sister if I forgot what it was, some marriage in the family where the father dies or can't produce a child, you can lie with your sister or her wife or whatever, and they were talking about how bad that was. And so I brought out the Old Testament and said, well, it was okay if your brother's wife dies and they live with you in your house and the brother dies without giving him children, you can lie with your brother's wife and give him children. So I'm like, so what's the difference? No, that's all different. You see what I mean? That's why I don't get into it. Because all that stuff has got nothing to do with your soul, serving God, growing in God, learning to be more like God so that when you die and move on to that area, you're going to mesh with a positive up and over as opposed to a negative up and over. Barely any blood and guts. Okay. Anyway, I think I've come to the point here. I'm pretty much done what I was going to do on the inspiration, and I'm going to say this now out to people listening that when I'm talking about these aspects, I'm talking about learning the Greek and Hebrew to get the words and checking them in with reality, using Jesus' teaching as a guide. That's what I'm doing. If you don't like that, that's fine. But I am not going to go into battling of denominations and battling of religions. So you can keep the comments to yourself and start your own channel if you'd like to do that. I'm not going to address it. It's not that I'm not doing it because I'm afraid I might find out. No, it's not. The old ways of life and family and laws and all that are change and move on. But the principles of love and caring for one another and helping one another stay. Back then, when a husband dies and the child is the wife is childless, who's going to take care of her? I mean, it was about not only keeping the bloodline going for the family, but is that your children will take care of you in your older age. So what's going to happen with a woman whose husband dies and doesn't have any children? It would be immoral to have her as by our standards, to do what that was. But the whole point was it was in the bloodline. This way, they can have a child and move it on. It makes sense to me. I don't see nothing wrong in it in the context. Just like when they had slavery in the United States, oh my God, how terrible that these white men had slavery. Well, first off, everyone had slavery all over the world, all colors, everywhere. Black on black, white on white, black on white, white on black. It doesn't matter. So back when the United States was with its slavery, everyone had slavery. It was the principles of the United States which ended slavery and others did as well. And there's still slavery to this day around the world. So obviously the whole thing of talking about how evil it was and slavery was that you're talking about you're talking about morals in a place and time, in a whole different lifestyle and structure. That what God has done in those lifestyles and structures is not sit there with a clipboard going, no, you guys got it all wrong. You're all wrong. It's God looks at what you get right. And we kick it up a notch, and we get a little bit closer to God, and get a little bit closer. And how close are we to God now than we were, say, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago? Well, we're closer to God, but God is infinitely away from us. So if we're going to actually have to attain God's righteousness, forget it. But what the aspect is, every improvement in society, like slavery is now looked at as wrong in general. Well, that's an improvement. A lot of slavery was done because it was the idea of when you got hired and you get paid. Back in those times, a lot of people would sell themselves into slavery as a form of payment, guaranteed work. Yeah, they could be abused. Yeah, they were abused. And then the slavery came up to a pay where they're capturing you and making you work in war or what have you. But when you look back and say they were all wrong for having slavery, it's like you got to look into context of it all. That's why I don't get all into the old stuff in the Old Testament and all that, because the principles are meant for survival at that time. What I like about Jesus' teachings, it's not only Jesus, but what I like about Jesus' teachings is the principles are timeless. So you can look at what Jesus taught and look into this current year, and apply those principles in our space and time. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to use Jesus here to correct, if I can use that phrase, the current Christianity based on Jesus' teachings and comparing them to what is being taught now in the churches or whatever. That's what I'm doing. So so that's what the deal is. So what I would like is the people who are in the chat room to not proselytize, but to ask questions, because I don't have, as I'm getting older and getting closer to my own death, and I'm getting, let's just say that I'm working harder and longer than I have in my life as I get older. I have less patience, less tolerance. I used to argue on boards. I'd go on the FidoNet, which is pre-internet days. I had my Commodore 128, which actually did have an 80-column screen, and I would go on there and I would talk. I would sit there for hours on the Mormon board and on the Jehovah's Witness board, so I could learn what that theology is from them, not from Christians telling me what's wrong with it. And I spent hours on doing it. And when I would do a Bible study for a Sunday, I would spend 8 hours of studying, typing up and passing out the little 40-minute Bible teaching. I mean, that's just what it takes. I mean, I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you what I did, and not even meant it to be considered. That's just what it is. So I would talk on the boards, and I would explain, I bring this up and all that, and I'm basically, and I went into the fundamentalist Baptist stuff, and I would learn all these things, and then I'm arguing with my own church based on their theology, having problems with what the Bible says, and then of course, if you leave that scenario, you're going out into the general world who doesn't even go along with anything that Bible or Jesus says, or Jesus is some kind of a feel-good. I mean, I've come to the point where I don't argue anymore because it's fruitless, because most people are not interested in learning a particular thing. Like, for example, what I'm talking about here, people can take some kind of a lesson, a learning, some kind of, hey, that's a good point, I'll think about that. And they'll go out into their world and not follow my theology, but they can take a kernel of it and go on in their life. It may help someone. That is not found around. That's why I can't listen to talk show hosts or Bible teachers or whatever, because Everyone knows absolutely what the truth is. And I'm here, and you're blessed and lucky that I'm here to tell you what it is. And it's just not the way I am. I've learned from years that everyone has it wrong. If you're watching now and you think you understand all of the intricacies of your particular religion or denomination, and you think that you got it all right, you're wrong. Because most of the time, all of these things are done with some type of interpretation and application which is open to an individual, to an individual's inspiration. Are they inspired by ritual, fear? Are they inspired by arrogance? Are they inspired by ego? Are they inspired by brainwashing? Are they inspired by if you know, a lot of times you get someone who's very scholarly, they're inspired by their own enamored view of what they have understood. When you watch an intellectual or someone who is a voracious reader and they're doing a show, watch YouTube. You'll find all kinds of books behind them because they're looking in their books and they're going, I know I'm cool. I know stuff because here we go. I've read 20,000 books. No, I'm not saying that's great. Knowledge is great, having information on there. But when you watch people, you'll see what their inspiration is by this stuff. And you know, my inspiration is not from me being smart, though I guess I am. You know, intelligent, I guess I am. I mean, I don't think I am, but sometimes I figure out problems, and I'm amazed at how other people don't. So I guess I do have some, and I'm also dumb, and I'm also ignorant in other areas that other people figure out. And what I have found that my strength is that I could share with other people, which is, again, nothing is always 100%, is that I have a little, what I call a BS meter built in. And the reason why that I say I have it is because over the years I've learned to trust it, and it has really worked. And I learn truth by learning what is not true. That's me. Now, maybe you can blame my mother, who was very critical and always pointing out things wrong. But it's a methodology. And so, and I learned from, I read Socrates as a person who does that too. Socrates basically pointed out all the flaws and all the logic that people had there, which ended up costing him his life because people got sick and tired of hearing him tear down their theories or whatever. So that's what I'm doing here is I am telling you what I have found. Basically, it's because of what I've found that wasn't correct, that had problems. I kept turning the data until, in fact, I have a couple of visuals I'm going to put together to show you. I kept rearranging the points on the graph, on a three-dimensional graph, until it made a line. You know, and that's the perspective to look at to find the truth. And that is what I've been doing, and that's what I'm sharing. And people can do as they may. I would ask questions. People want to, you know, they can ask me a question just in you know, a philosophical sense. I like watching Stefan Molyneux. You know, I don't. Again, he's a very intelligent, high IQ intellectual, and so a lot of his stuff when he talks, he's going to have this condescending kind of arrogance. It's actually hard. It's hard when something is so obvious to not do that. But a lot of his stuff his arguments are really solid. One problem I have with one of his arguments is the being an atheist of some type. That his philosophy, as he puts it, doesn't need to have a God. Now, these are my words, not his, so don't. Doesn't need to have a God to have morality in the world. And I just look at everything from Kubla Khan on and say, like, it comes down to what happens in this world is not morality. What drives this world is I can kick your butt. I can do it financially. I could do it business-wise, intellectually. I can do it physically. I got bombs. I got cleverness. This is how the world works, and nobody is interested. I mean, it's a virus, and they will kill everybody in their best interest and then kill the goose, and then the world dies. This is how I see it all. With the intervention of theology, you have not only wisdom, but you also have an inescapable accountability for how you handle things. It could be, it's negative, but it's positive too. You know, those who give a cup of cold water to drink shall not lose their reward. And it didn't have to do anything fantastic, just, you know, be nice about it. So, I mean, this is the way, and this is where Jesus teaches come to me. So, all right, I think I'm going to go. If there's anybody has any questions, I mean, I'm also noticing that the last shows, while my subscriptions are going up, if you'd like to subscribe, you know how you do it. I don't mention this stuff because I'm sure everybody knows how to do it. You put the subscribe button if you wanted to. You hit the bell button and all that to get information. But the number of views are going down, and so I don't know how to take that. I mean, if the views are going down, but the people who are viewing them are really being helped, then that's all I care about in a large sense of it, and so on. I have started getting into more music and audio, and I've even starting to design plans. I want to talk to, I think it's Rob. You know, I talked to this guy from New Jersey out there, and I've talked to him for hours on the phone now, and I don't know if I remember his name. I think it's Bob or Rob, and I'm sorry I forgot your name, but when I talk to people, I don't say their name while I'm talking to them. So I got a phone number in the book, my cell phone, and I call him. But anyway, he was talking to me about, I wish Bob Carver would do speakers this way, that, and he says, why don't you do it? You know? And it was kind of interesting because it really kind of got under my skin, and I spent the last few days on my free time, instead of reading redundancies about how Kavanaugh was being this and that and how all that nonsense, I started looking in the speaker stuff, and I've learned a lot about it, and I've come up with an idea to make a line of speakers that are very good but are more artistic in their design. And so I'm going to talk to him this week. But I wanted to mention that that's one of the things I was thinking about doing. Because it'd be wonderful, like if I can build these things custom, they can be sold for a lot of money. And so it's something I can do in a post-driving era that I can do for a living, help to help stay alive. And so, see, this was an inspiration. Now, talking with Bob, I believe his name is Bob, talking with Bob, he inspired me to look into building my own line of speakers. Now, I'm not a audio engineer. I'm not a speaker engineer. I mean, I mentioned Bob Carver, who's a guy I love his stuff. It's just way expensive. I have a bunch of Carver stuff, but it's older because the price went down, but it's still great. But I'm not an engineer. So I'm learning on things that have already been done. My input on it is going to be more in the creative area of the speaker, artistic area. So that's going to be. I'm not stealing anything from anybody, but I'm using general knowledge in line source drivers and subwoofers. General knowledge that's known, common. Many people have built their own speakers, as I've been reading on this stuff, but now I can add my own 2 cents into it, which makes them unique and different, and that's why hopefully somebody might want to buy them. And so that's kind of that's an inspiration. Now, I say that's not divine. I mean, what I mean by that is it's not going to about my soul or whatever, but it is about my soul in that one of the things that I maintain people are here is they're here to create. When God says, I'm going to make you in my image, my personal my understanding of that is God creates. The devil mutates. And other beings take the creation that's there, and they have their aspects in it. What humans have this ability to do, now granted they're not creating something out of nothing, but when you start out looking at Earth, and then you look at what humanity has done, is you have the ability to create and innovate. And so a beaver makes a dam based on its genetic coding, or perhaps it's inspiration from an animal spirit, or however it is, but they may adapt to certain circumstances and have alternations, but I mean, it's a dam, a beaver dam. They're not building a 100-foot steel and concrete beaver dam, you know. Somebody invented concrete, somebody invented steel and a raw material, and so on. And so you have this creative force, and what I've been lacking over years is this creativity. I've been doing it with the radio shows and stuff like that, but the music and other things, and that is what I think personal calling is coming to doing in that. So, all right, that's neither here nor there, so let me let you go. Oh, Less Visible. Yeah, I mentioned that Less Visible did write the links are below. He did write an update on his situation, and then just before I went on the air, I saw he actually posted another post, which is more in the traditional less posting, and so I'll update that second link too, so you can check on him and keep him in prayer. And so I hope that hope all of this is helping people, and I'm gonna go. So we'll see you. See you next week. I may be doing some other stuff that I'll do offline and put it up there, but we'll see what happens. I was actually looking at doing a show on the term Lucifer. It's very important stuff about that. Maybe I'll do that next week, or maybe not. We'll see. But anyway, send email and comments if you have some topic or theological issue or philosophical theological issue that you'd like me to look into. So I'll see you then.